Hello, everyone. So I just want to do a quick, really brief lecture to address this question of what's happening with the bourgeoisie while the proletariat are often being exploited and alienated and suffering for false consciousness. Because up to this point, I think it's really easy to listen to all the other lectures and what we have discussed face to face and think that the bourgeoisie are off just sitting there, just existing to exploit and alienate, that they have complete freedom, complete control of their own lives, and that they can do whatever they want while the proletariat are off suffering. But that's actually not really true. If you remember, we've talked quite a bit up to this point about these stages of history that Marx lays out. So we have primitive communism, slave societies, feudalism, capitalism, and then socialism/communism. And we talked about how for Marx, history is progressive. We're progressing towards increased freedom. But we haven't reached the ultimate freedom yet, right? So within the context of capitalism, yes, there is significantly more freedom than there has ever been, and that applies to both the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. But the bourgeoisie themselves are not living with true freedom. It's just like being in a medieval king, for instance. You had a lot of power and you had more freedom than the peasants did, but you still didn't have ultimate freedom. We, as members of the proletariat, if you remember the proletariat, which you probably are, you have more freedom than a medieval king did. Just like medieval kings are limited, so are the bourgeoisie. And the reason why is because the bourgeoisie, like every other social group that has ever existed, ultimately serves capitalism. All social classes, regardless of what type of economic system we're talking about, ultimately serve the system that they are embedded in. And the bourgeoisie are no exception here. The bourgeoisie have to serve capitalism. They can't escape from it. If they try to escape from the system and what the system requires of them, they will ultimately be destroyed on an individual level. So individual capitalists will essentially be kicked out of the bourgeoisie, not by any person, but by just the way the system operates. And so the way this plays out is that the individual capitalists are driven to generate profit. We talked about that before. If they don't generate profit, their businesses will ultimately fail. And the profit that they generate is going to be spent in one of two ways. The first is for consumption. So Marx talks about what he calls the capitalist consumption fund, which he doesn't really focus on. This isn't incredibly important to his argument, because the capitalist consumption fund makes up significantly less of the total profits than this second fund, the second use of the money. And the capitalist consumption fund is all that money that's used for the personal life and lifestyle of the capitalist. So it's the money that the capitalist spends to buy food, to buy clothing, shelter, cars. If they're buying luxuries like yachts and mansions, then that's where the money's coming from. Again, Marx isn't really too focused on this, because what he sees as really much more important is what Marx calls the capitalist accumulation fund. So this is the bulk of the profit, and what happens to the capitalist accumulation fund is that it gets reinvested back into the business. The reason why that has to happen is because capitalists, or capitalist firms, companies, are competing with other companies. And they compete by generating profit, reinvesting that profit back into their businesses, and then using that money to do things like research to develop new products, buying new technologies to speed up their production process, coming up with ways to create new products, create better products, innovating, growing their businesses, expanding their businesses to produce more so they can sell to more markets, so they can generate more profit, and so on. Any organization, any firm that doesn't do that is going to lose out, is going to be outcompeted by other companies that are reinvesting. And so companies that don't reinvest will ultimately end up going out of business. And what happens then to the bourgeoisie owner or owners of that firm, of that company? Well, they lose their ownership over the means of production. They sink down to the level of the proletariat, and they are essentially kicked out of the bourgeoisie class. Again, it's not a person. They're not like being fired from the bourgeoisie, but they go out of business. They no longer own the means of production. Therefore, they are not in the bourgeoisie anymore. They have to then go out and work by selling their labor to others. And so they become a member of the proletariat. So again, everyone in capitalism, as in all economic systems, serves that system. The bourgeoisie serve capitalism just like the proletariat do. Now, I'm not saying here that the bourgeoisie don't have more freedom than the proletariat. The bourgeoisie absolutely do. the bourgeoisie, for instance, aren't exploited. They are very likely to not be alienated. Bourgeoisie can pursue their own interests. They can work creatively if they so choose. They at least have the capacity to work creatively. They have a lot more control over their time. They have a lot more control over just their lives in general. So they do have more freedom. But a member of the bourgeoisie can't, for instance, not act in service to capitalism. Again, it just doesn't work. They end up, just by virtue of the way the system works, they end up getting removed from the bourgeoisie. Okay, thanks.